Hello and welcome to Founders Amplified, where we spotlight underrepresented founders who are driving innovation and impact across various industries and sectors across the globe. I'm your host, Narayan Kulkarni, and I'm excited to be here with you today. Today's guest is Sara Arsalane. Sara Arsalane is the founder and managing director of LilyPad, an award-winning nonprofit reimagining the library space to restore belonging and joy for children pushed to the margins. Originally from Casablanca, Morocco, and now based in Berlin, Germany, Sara identifies as a North African woman and migrant, perspectives that deeply shape her commitment to social change. She holds a Master in Management from ESCP Business School in France and a Master's in Social Innovation from the University of Cambridge in the UK, where her research explored stigma, legitimacy, and the inclusion of women and young girls in systems that are often built against them. Since founding LilyPad in 2017, the organization has established 20 inclusive community libraries and storytelling workshops across Germany, Morocco, Uganda, and France, supporting thousands of displaced and socially excluded children. Through her work, Sara bridges impact, social innovation, and grounded operational strategy in order to build systems that leverage the power of education to bridge inequities and expand access to opportunity. So, now that you know a little bit more about Sara, let's dive in to the conversation. Welcome to Founders Amplified, Sara. It is so wonderful to have you with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much as well, and let's get started. So the first thing I'd love to know more about is about your journey as a founder. So could you tell us a little bit more about what led you to become a founder, and if there are any particular moments or experiences that sparked that decision?
So I would say I stumbled into this journey a bit by coincidence. It was never the plan to be a founder, but rather I created my organization because I noticed there was a gap. So more concretely, I wanted to volunteer. That was back in 2017. I knew I was really interested in the social sector, but I had a few limitations that, first of all, I didn't have a lot of time to travel, leave the country and volunteer. And also, I really wanted to make sure that I didn't take part in what is called volunteerism, which is just to um, get, usually you have to pay for an opportunity to volunteer abroad. It's very superficial and may do more harm than good. So I thought I really want to see the world and mostly volunteer at a small organization, and I couldn't find one basically that would take me. So I ended up just creating my own. And slowly over the years, the organization has grown organically. It's the story of LilyPad goes way beyond me. It's really a group and team effort. And that has been my journey over the last few years.
Wow, thanks so much for sharing. Two things I heard, which I appreciate, was first of all, I appreciate what sounds like a level of intentionality and not wanting to be part of volunteerism, but also a desire to explore and see the world. I think those two, I think, are wonderful, and it sounds like those two powerfully shape the organic journey of evolution that it sounds like LilyPad has had for some time. So that's wonderful. Now, I'd like to learn a little bit more about that journey, maybe a little bit more about your identity and how that ties into LilyPad. So, can you tell me and our audience a bit more about what parts of your identity and story you feel give you a unique journey as a founder?
Of course, so a bit of background. Originally from Casablanca, Morocco. I was born there, grew up there, moved to Europe when I was 18, initially France, and then Germany, and I've been settled in Berlin for over 10 years. And my identity and like my journey is very much shaped by who I am, the places I've lived. I am North African woman, a woman of color, which I discovered only by moving to Europe. So I also have acquired this identity of migrant. I can understand the migrant experience. And that has shaped some of the decisions and some of the turns we've taken at LilyPad and the kind of work that we do. So first of all, to start with the basics, why reading? Reading transformed my life entirely. I grew up very, very shy, and I loved reading. Like it was my whole world was reading books, and that really transformed my personality in a way. I became a lot more extrovert. I always wanted, I mentioned earlier, I wanted to see the world. I wanted to meet people. And I really have books to thank for that and for the place where I am today. So I always had this idea of, well, books are very cheap, reading is great, but in so many places, we're not encouraging reading for pleasure. It's really focused on reading as in academic practice and doing well at school, which is very true in a culture like mine, Morocco, and also in a lot of migrant families that you really have to do well at school academically because it's almost survival. So that has really been the essence of why LilyPad exists, and also LilyPad in Germany. So we do have the libraries in Morocco, we have libraries in Germany, and we've had projects in other places. But of course, Germany is a bit of a different case. There are plenty of libraries here. There is already a culture of reading. So we are mainly focusing on migrant and refugee families in particular, and those who live in shelters. And that's how, again, my identity, the fact that I understand how it feels to have two homes or to have to fit into a new society. While of course I do have my blind spots, I have not been forcibly displaced. I don't come from a comfort zone, so obviously it's not. I never say that I have lived experience, but I do understand some of the challenges and also importance of being connected with your native language. And so that's also what we do at LilyPad is not only encourage reading in general. So here it would be reading in German is just the most of what happens, but also making sure that we celebrate the kids' native language and their cultural and linguistic identity.
Wow, that was incredible. I really appreciate that you shared. Actually, a lot of what you shared also resonates with me. So one thing which I love that you mentioned was how your identity has been shaped by being a migrant or moving, which was sounds like another choice, and also the fact that you, to rephrase, maybe acquired the identity of being a migrant, also learning about being having the identity of a person of color. That resonates because I similarly, I was born outside the U.S., but my parents moved to the U.S., and so like that was of course not a choice of mine. And also, but I was very attuned to acutely aware of that. Also, to the aspect of how reading went ahead and shaped your and academic performance shaped your work. I can also relate because I mean, as an Indian American growing up, that is very much an expectation societally, but also due to the model minority myth, due to, of course, survival and other things. But also, I think that was magnified because being part of a medical family, that's there. But I will also say, to another point you have, I naturally loved reading, and like I was very curious about the world because I was distanced from my native languages. That I did not have the resources to study those. I used reading as much as I could as sources of that. And language teachers, interestingly, my French teacher in particular, were really strong encouragers of that. So, of course, I always deeply appreciate people who are speakers of French for that reason, or people who have like from Francophone countries. But to the other point, which I also wanted to mention, which I also love that you shared, is like, so sometimes it sounds like reading kind of helped you flower into your identity. I can tell you, for example, I've always considered myself to be ambiverted. A lot of people imposed upon me an identity of introversion because of like certain expectations of like white people's perspectives on like what it means to be like forward versus me having a more respectful demeanor. But at the same time, to your point, like, yeah, um, when knowing one's own language, that can be really powerful. And I applaud what you're doing with LilyPad to go ahead and connect people with that in your library. So again, I just love what you shared, and I just love how also that ties very organically into what you're doing with Lily Pads Libraries. And I'd love to, that's actually a perfect bridge to my next question, which I'd love to learn more about. So there are, of course, a number of different nonprofits that function in like literacy, nonprofits that touch language. But what is unique about LilyPad's approach and specifically about your libraries?
It's I would say that what's special about the lily pad libraries is that first of all they're small. That's where the name lily pad comes from. It's little library, and also they're spaces where it's not necessary to read. And this is something that we discovered along the way. So it's been now over 8, 9 years of LilyPad, and we really learned a lot from our mistakes, from our blind spots, from just observing what happens in our libraries. And a lot of the time, the kids, because we are in particularly targeting children who are most at risk of being left out, so whether that's in remote areas, living in shelters, living in orphanages, um, these kids have to deal with so much. And sometimes, or very often, the literacy level also is not where it should be according to, the formal educational system. So, f reading, quite frankly, can seem inaccessible and also sometimes intimidating. And again, a lot of the kids don't necessarily come from a culture of reading where they read stories every day, and so it's not as easy as open a library and kids are going to read. So over the years, we realized that actually where we add the most value, because we're so small and grassroots, and we have our kind of presence, is what we can do for sure in our specialty is to create a safe space. So it's really reimagining the idea of the library beyond just this stereotypical, quiet, but strict space with a very rigid system where you can borrow books. Quite frankly, our libraries are nothing like that. They're small, they're sometimes loud. Kids often come and just draw, or they just want to come and talk to a volunteer or facilitator. Our lily pad librarian in Casablanca, she's almost psychologist, a confidant. It's way more than what you may think of a librarian. And slowly this space becomes familiar. The books also that are there becomes less scary, maybe. And then eventually they're like, okay, well, maybe I can read as well. Or well, how about you get me this book? So I'd say that's what's unique about libraries. It's really for everyone, for all kids, whether they like reading, whether they don't, whether they'll like reading a bit more further down the line. Or in many cases, we really welcome that kids may want to express themselves through just writing or drawing or music, and that's why we are trying to provide as much as possible these kind of different workshops that speak to all children, and not just the ones who already have the literacy skills needed to read all the novels that we have in there. I hope that answers the question.
Beautifully said. That definitely does. I love how you talked about libraries being safe spaces, which of course is especially important because as you've talked about, as you've noted with LilyPad, you're serving children who are often from marginalized backgrounds, who are from cultures that may not promote literacy in other ways that like maybe in other parts of the world or other parts of their broader macro culture within the subset of the world. Also, I love how you've talked about how there's an emphasis on safe space in a creative space more broadly than simply like the quote unquote stereotypical, if we want to use that word, understanding of what a library is. And that of course also resonates with me because when I grew up, I went to a number of libraries myself. I actually loved reading, as I told you about. I just naturally am a curious person. I loved reading, and I was actually in high school one of the founding members of a informal advisory board in the local library. We tried to think of ways to get people to go to the library, and we actually we decided themed balls, for example, off of one a very popular American series at the time, which got like nearly 100 teens over to the library rather than, like, for example, in, like the Allura books. Also, we created poetry nights. One poetry night, for example, where in particular was very resonant for me because that kickstarted a poetry habit, which I've like held very personal to me and has shaped my broader expression. So I just love the fact you're making because, and to a point you've not directly said but implied, the element of safe space can, of course, be dramatically empowering for a child, and that can shape a lot of their identity in the bigger picture and the bigger future. And but this leads me to my next question, which is to a
Oh,
point that you
sorry.
talked about with.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to actually follow up on a really important point that you mentioned,
Yeah, of
because
course.
really what is
Before I ask my
made
question, would love to hear your follow-up perspective. Yeah, sure.
it's just I think on the other cultures not necessarily having the culture of reading. I think I thought it's really important to emphasize there was a very rich culture of reading. So if you look at Arab countries, like in the Middle East, even Morocco or a country like Uganda, there's such rich literature and some of the greatest thinkers come from the region, and there's also a very deep history of oral storytelling. For example, it's just really rich, and there was this culture of reading, but it was lost, I think, over the years, over the last decades, and that's because of the really the way I see it is just the aftermath of years of colonization that shattered a lot of these countries, which left frankly most of the population, unless you're really part of the elite, kind of like scrambling just to survive. And so there's really the emphasis on we're going to focus on education as survival, like we were talking about recently. And so parts of culture are not so much of a focus, especially when it comes to children. And so yeah, I just thought that was important kind of to mention that it is very much there, but just need to be revived. And yeah, sorry again for to interrupt you.
No worries, and thank you so much for clarifying that point. So when I made that point earlier, I was specifically, I guess, in my mind, had the perspective of in certain cities, for example, certain parts of cities, certain places where, due to unfortunate socioeconomic conditions that people have to live in, that would prioritize survival issues over others. And over time, that can reduce the value of literacy relative to where it was just by virtue of systemic factors beyond one's control. But yes, I want to also put to your point, if we think about in certain contexts, for example, I think West Africa being, and North and West Africa potentially as well, being a really good example of this. There are rich, generations old storytelling, oral storytelling practices. That is something that they're known for. There's this intangible cultural heritage that runs deep, and a society is indebted to these parts of the world due to what these have done. But sadly, again, due to broad factors like colonialism, as you've pointed out, that can be lost and has been lost in some of those areas. And so, yes, to the point that yes, storytelling has been valued in other parts of the world, but has been either forgotten or sorry, I'm sad to use this word, but suppressed in certain circumstances. And so it might be for some people a rediscovery process, which really connects them with that. So that's I appreciate that you brought up this extremely important point, and thank you so much for sharing. Which is actually, again, related to the question I was going to ask. Of course, where one particular is can shape how so place can shape how one engages with a particular space. So, and cultural context can, of course, affect how one engages with the space. So I'm just curious if you could tell me and our audience more about, for example, the lily pad libraries in places like Morocco, or the lily pad libraries in places like Berlin or in places like Germany. How do the macrocultures shape
Of
the
course.
how those would be received? And more broadly, let's think 5 to 10 years into the future of like a child who engages and is part of the lily pad libraries. What do you see in their lives in like 5 to 10 years that tell you that the work you're doing in the lily pad libraries is working?
So of course the profile, the background of the kids we work with in Germany, in Morocco, they're quite different. So in as explained
Certainly.
earlier, the kids in Germany, most of them are of refugee background. They have this forced displacement background, whether themselves or whether their parents, because many of them actually were born in Germany, and most of them live in collective accommodations, but there are with their families. While the most of the kids we work with in Morocco, and recently we have been focusing on girls in particular, they live in shelters without because they have been separated from their families. So they are dealing with different kind of issues like abandonment, issues with the justice system. There's really the a wide array of challenges, and it's all intersectional, and that they are dealing with. So they may seem quite far in terms of their background, but really the challenges at the same. And at the core of what we do, what we think would significantly improve the quality of life as they enter adulthood is to feel belonging. And that's what we want to address is really the fact that these kids, amplified by the fact that they don't live in normal accommodations like everyone they go to school with, for those who go to school, um, they really feel excluded, and they are excluded in many cases by all the systems around them. So for us, success is for that child to feel more confidence in themselves, to feel that they really belong, that they have a voice, and that they have opportunities in front of them. So there's nothing worse than feeling hopeless and feeling that you don't have options. And by hopefully being in a space, whether it's a workshop or being in contact with the facilitator who's encouraging them, who's speaking their native language to just showcase that they can be proud of who they are. If that over time, or even through just one visit, makes them feel a little bit better, so improves their well-being on the spot, we really hope that there's like a trickle effect that would give them the right tools to address these systems that we're talking about.
Thanks so much for sharing. And could you maybe share a little bit more about how just I understand like lilypad libraries are in different places, and of course every child individual that is in your library has a unique different experiences. But could you maybe give a small flavor for maybe one or two different examples of a few different places of like how that broader context might shape the impact that might differ or be slightly different in say like the broader macro geographic context of where they're located. I know this is a giant big question again, impossible to go ahead and generalize, but just for a flavor for our audience, what that might look like.
So for in Germany, for example, it's really to counter the anti-migrant sentiment. And especially nowadays, the situation is much more difficult in 2025 than in 2017 when we started. It is much more difficult to be a migrant, to be a refugee, to live in a refugee accommodation nowadays. There's always attacks that are happening. You read the news, there's so much hostility. When you're a child, you just don't understand. So that's the context is extremely important, especially given how bleak it is. And of course, we are always hopeful that things could be better. But there is to be reinforcement of this identity and making sure that the kids are really proud of who they are, that they don't listen to background noise. So that's why it's important when it comes to the micro level of what are our interventions, what are our workshops. They are most of them are bilingual. So we have, of course, German, which is the language everyone speaks, but we usually have a facilitator who speaks Arabic, for example, and or Ukrainian. Arabic tends to be the main language because that's the one that most of the kids in our biggest libraries, that's the other language that they speak. And some of our facilitators came to this country as well as refugees. So that's really powerful that they can be a role model. They are artists, they have so much to share. The kids think it's very cool. So it's we have to speak kind of their language, and come up with creative ways, basically, of how they can engage with stories. So that's one particularity of, let's say, like a small example of the kind of work that happens in a refugee accommodation in Berlin. In Morocco, we are focusing at the moment mostly on girls. It hasn't always been the case, but we want to focus mostly on girls because there is a much bigger gap. The numbers don't lie. They are more at risk of dropping out of school. They deal with more challenges also, when it comes to things like gender-based violence and so on. There as well, we want to make sure that once they leave the shelter, because with these, once you turn 18, they have to be independent and figure it out, which is so young. 18, you're still a child. So the work that goes into the libraries is, again, making sure that they feel confident that they've got this, that they can really do whatever they want, that they see other possibilities. Recently, we invited a published author who's Moroccan, who delivered a workshop last year on basically creative writing and how you can tell your story. And the girls from the Casablanca shelter loved it so much they kept asking about her, and she came back this year. And really, one of the best realizations is that always her feedback has been that the girls are so talented, that there is so much talent, that they're able to come up with really creative pieces. And that's so powerful to just have someone to tell them, you are great, you should continue this, and she really encouraged them. So that's always the in the background. That's the main objective of our work, I would say, because we're very small, we're grassroots. Of course, reading has so many benefits. It could have been that we wanted to improve reading so that the kids improve their academic performance. But that's not really our expertise, I would say. It's really reading as a catalyst of well-being, confidence, and ultimately having this feeling of belonging, and that, as I said, I got this.
Wow, thanks so much for sharing. Two things I especially appreciate you talked about were um, illustrating intersectionality. So, for example, self-identifying as a woman in the context of Morocco, and why like you're focusing on girls, it sounds like, due to that, and also, for example, the unique challenges that migrants face in Germany. But also, to another point that I love that you made was role modeling from someone who self-identifies that is older can be extraordinarily empowering, especially when one has that personal relationship with them. And it sounds like those children have seen that in both Germany and Morocco through the examples that you've talked about, and it sounds like as well in many different contexts more broadly. So thanks for sharing that. Now, I'm sure you've learned quite a bit on your journey as a founder. So can you tell us one thing that you know now that you wish you had known prior to starting?
So many so many lessons. I
Maybe
could speak
two, since
about
there you've a lot. Maybe two.
I could speak about this forever. I would say it's one boring but very important one is learn how to do fundraising. And that's applies, I think, in all industries, but especially the social sector. There's really no way around getting anything done without fundraising. It has become even more difficult, but it's a really necessary skill. As I mentioned also at the start, I ended up in this position a bit by coincidence, and I didn't know what I was doing. This is not my background. But the positive story that I want to share is that you can learn anything. And when I look at some of the ways we did fundraising 2 years ago, so then when Lilypad became a bit more professional, I started having paid staff, to now, we've come such a long way. So that's an important lesson, I would say, is I wish I had learned fundraising earlier. And another one that actually I learned quite early on, but transformed the way we approach pretty much anything at LilyPad is that you can change your direction at any time as long as you're pursuing impact. So it doesn't matter that original idea that you had if it's not working. So that's something that the original idea of LilyPad was always libraries, but it was just open as many libraries as possible everywhere. And then we realized, oh, some of these things are not really working. You need consistency. You need to add workshops. I think I had listened to a podcast, and the person mentioned, said this phrase, the relentless pursuit of impact. And that resonated with me so much. And from that point on, we really made some tweaks through trial and error, and changed our strategy to make sure that what we're providing actually works. And that's way more important than sticking to one structure, one way of doing things just because. So that's a really, I would probably like choose that one if I had to choose just one lesson.
Beautifully said. Amazing lessons. Thanks so much. Um, how can people find you and how can they support your work?
So people can find us online in our website, so that's lilypadlibrary.org. Also, so same in social media, Instagram is Lilypad Library. There's multiple ways to get involved with LilyPad. You could become a monthly donor. That's something that we really value. I think all grassroots organizations get so much from monthly donorship because it provides some much needed stability. So if anyone is able to, I really encourage them to donate to, the LilyPad or their local small organization. It really goes a long way. When that's not accessible, of course, making a one-time donation or volunteering. So its core, LilyPad will always be a volunteer-run organization. We were only powered by volunteers for the first 5 to 6 years. Our team is a mix of paid staff, but that's a minority. It's really mainly core volunteers. So if you're based in Berlin, but also if you are based somewhere else, we do have always room for core volunteers. So people who would then join our team and would dedicate a couple hours a week, and they would have like their own position. And this is something that has worked really well because we're small. Our volunteers tend to see really tangible impact of their work while they are at LilyPad. And of course, we're also always open to partnerships. I'm a firm believer that we don't generate true change in silos. So always open to discussions with other nonprofit organizations, or also private organizations, any kind of individual who resonates with our work and has an idea. Really have an open door policy, and we'd love to hear from them. And you could email me at any time, and I'd love to talk to you.
Thanks so much for sharing, Sarah. And to our audience, you can find the information that Sarah has mentioned in the show notes. Now it's time for our signature question. Can you please fill in the blank? I amplify.
I amplify belonging by making sure that no kid feels left behind.
Wow, very profound. And thanks so much for sharing your wonderful perspectives and for being on this podcast. It was amazing to hear about your story and the amazing things that you're doing with LilyPad and the impact that that's promising in our world. And I just want to pause and reflect on some things that I've appreciated about this conversation and celebrate you for being a fantastic founder, underrepresented founder driving impact. So a few things that I really admire about what you've shared. So number one, I love that It sounds like you've had a drive to learn something that has really empowered you with learning and literacy. That's something it sounds like you are again giving back from what sounds like a place of gratitude, but also a place of awareness of challenges that are faced. I love how you've talked about unpacked issues of literacy, for example, with nuance, with awareness of the systemic factors that are shaped by that. And how that can really powerfully affect individuals. I love that. That I sense there's an empathy, there is a awareness, there is an intention that underpins that. That's very clear to me in how you've explained what you've done and also what you've done. And finally, I just love that. Again, this is the mark of someone who has great wisdom, great intention, but also is authentic in what they're doing. Your ability to, for example, speak at to powerful things with simplicity, but which promise a lot of uniqueness. So, for example, you talked about the importance of fundraising in your lessons. You talked about the importance of changing of direction. These are what may be simple but also very powerful lessons to our audience. If you follow this podcast, when you hear the I Amplify answer, a lot of individuals will talk about individuals or entities that they amplify. Sarah's answer is unique among that constellation. She talked about there's a principle she amplifies through what she does. So again, I love the your unique strand of wisdom that you bring to what you do. So again, thank you so much for being you and what you are doing, and for amplifying wonderful individuals and indirectly amplifying amazing other founders and issues, and just being a beacon of impact in our world. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for creating this podcast and for your passion. It's much appreciated.
You're most welcome. So I look forward to staying in touch, and I'm sure we'll have a number of conversations in the future. But as our episode has come to an end, I'd like to say bye for now, Sarah.
Thank you. Goodbye.
To our listeners, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Founders Amplified. I hope you're feeling as inspired as I am. If you'd like to learn more about our guests and support them, check out the show notes for their details. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating, share it with someone you know, and follow us for more inspiring episodes like this one. If you're a founder who is driving innovation and impact in any industry or sector anywhere in the world and would like to be a guest, we'd love to hear from you. Check out the show notes for more information. And finally, remember that you, yes, you, have the power to amplify the voices around you. Whether you're a colleague, family member, friend, funder, mentor, or just another fellow human, your support matters. So I invite you to celebrate and uplift the underrepresented innovators in your life who are driving innovation and impact. Let's create a better future for everyone, together. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and keep amplifying.